Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Like I said, my name is Paul Anderson. I'm the Vice President of Repose Associates, and I'm the author of the 2021 New Markets Tax Credit Progress Report, as I have been for the last several years. Today, I'm going to run you through some highlights of the report. But first, let's take a second to thank the sponsors of the report. There's a lot of work that goes into this and a lot of staff time, and we really appreciate your support for this project each year. I think we have the most sponsors we've ever had this year. So this year, 60 CDEs filled out our survey, and we supplemented that with some data from CRA, from the Office of the Comptroller of Currency, and also a variety of other sources like annual reports by QualicBees. That's how we get some of the patient numbers and people served numbers. All told, we have 272 projects in this year's report that are analyzed. That's $5.5 billion in project costs. The project in the background here is the George Adair School, which was rehabbed by the National Trust Community Investment Corporation into a space where creatives, artists, entrepreneurs can all live, work, and interact with each other in the local community. Last year's projects generated 45,000 jobs. That's construction and full-time jobs. And the cost to the federal government was well under $20,000 per job. So this program is continuing to be very efficient. So what will come as no surprise to you, but last year was a big year for healthcare projects. There were more healthcare projects this year than there have ever been. 82 projects expanded access to healthcare, and there were 41 federally qualified health clinics and free clinics financed around the country this year. And of course, those are all very important in distributing the vaccine and testing for COVID. One example is the Aviva Health Center in Roseburg, Oregon, which was financed last year. That's a federally qualified health center. Last year was the highest share in terms of dollar amount of allocation deployed in rural communities. 24% went to non-metro counties. One such project is the Aleutian Islands Terra Project. This is expanding broadband out to those long string of islands off Alaska. It's going to benefit a lot of native villages. It's going to benefit a lot of health centers and quite a few educational facilities as well will benefit from this. This year, millions of Americans went to a food bank or a food pantry to get emergency food for the first time in their lives. And in 2020, there were 20 projects financed that expanded access to food, emergency food, through food banks, food pantries, other distribution programs. And the meals that those organizations produce. One example is 3 Square Food Bank, which is in Las Vegas. They opened up their 3rd location, which mostly serves seniors. Another example is the Greater Pittsburgh Community Food Bank, which was financed in 2020. And that one is actually featured on the cover of our progress report this year. 2 other examples are the San Antonio Food Bank, which was financed last year, and the Greater Akron Region Food Bank. 37 projects in 2020 expanded services for youth. That includes youth programs, early childhood education, and other enrichment programs for young people in low-income communities. And those projects served 84,000 children. And that's when you add up the daycare, the schools, the early childhood education, and all of the other services for youth. One example is the Overtown Youth Center, which is in Miami. That's been around for a while, but they outgrew their space and needed more space. So New Markets helped them finance a 62,000 square foot community resource center, and the new center triples their capacity. Manufacturing is still very much a huge part of the New Markets program, and it was again this year. It was the most popular use of New Markets. When you look down through all the deals, you look at manufacturing space that was created, industrial space, and maker spaces and incubators, and those sorts of projects. I counted up 152 manufacturing businesses that were financed in 2020 or benefited from new space. And that includes Delta Peanut, the project that just flashed before you right there. Speaking of makerspaces, this is a very cool project, the Makerhood Campus, and that's in Newark, New Jersey. It's a combination of historic renovation and new construction, and what they ended up creating was a space to support entrepreneurship and micro manufacturing enterprises. The campus actually includes live-work facilities, so people are living there. And there are 16 commercial tenants there. There's business support services, community programming, and a variety of other things. There are workshops, seminars, one-on-one advising, and meetups to cover financial planning, marketing, sales, and other skills that are needed to start a business and make it grow. And I actually counted 1,400 businesses and entrepreneurs who benefited from these incubators and makerspaces. Now, in a similar vein, nearly 80,000 individuals benefited from vocational training, college, K-12 education, workforce development, and other educational programs from projects financed in 2020. And a great example is Ivy Tech School for automotive training in Indianapolis, Indiana. And if memory serves me, this I think is the third project finance for Ivy Tech through new markets. Actually, President Obama visited one maybe 10 years ago. When you break these projects down into their component parts, you find quite a few nonprofits and health centers and community services. And let me give you a bit more on that. Basically, what we did is we looked at every single project, broke them down. We've done this before in past reports, but we went a lot deeper this time. In the past, I hadn't looked at market rate housing. And there's a tremendous amount of detail in the report on these component pieces of projects. To put a finer point on this, I created a little animation here that shows you what I mean by the different components of a project. The Salt City Market project in Syracuse, New York is used as the example here. So as you can see, there are a variety of things on the first floor, a variety of things on the second floor, and a variety of things on the third floor. And it's often the case that you do have some market rate housing on the top floor of a project. And in this project, 31% of the housing is set aside for affordable uses, and another 31% is set aside for workforce housing. And on that topic, this is the first progress report where we not only counted affordable housing units, but we also counted supportive housing units. And we found that over 2,000 combined affordable housing units and supportive housing units were created in 2020. This year's progress report includes an entire section on COVID-19, as you might expect. And in our survey, we asked CDEs to give us a bunch of detail on what they were experiencing with their borrowers, what they were experiencing with their organizations, how they were triaging existing projects they'd financed in previous years that were running into problems. So CDEs needed to modify loans for borrowers. They gave forbearance. Most often, payments were deferred. And it really varied across asset class. Projects with retail components face some challenges in filling their tenant spaces. I'm speaking of mixed-use projects that might have a retail component. There were construction delays, as you might imagine. There's labor shortages as people were locked down. A lot of construction was able to go forward last year. And that's mostly because construction is mostly an outdoor activity. But construction projects still face delays because you have to interface with people, often bureaucrats or other government officials who are, filling out your paperwork, getting your permits. And a lot of those folks were not in the office, as you might expect. So there were some delays related to that. Interestingly enough, quite a few CDEs reported that there really wasn't much of a issue last year. So I think it really depends on the asset class. So obviously projects that involve a lot of indoor gathering like theaters and event spaces face some challenges, and the appetite was diminished for those sorts of projects. In addition, a lot of project openings were delayed. For example, if you finance a school, let's say in 2019, and that school district was doing distance learning, then the school project may not have opened on time. So the report has some examples of projects that were financed in the past that were of great benefit to communities in dealing with COVID. For example, there have been 400 federally qualified health centers at this point financed through the program, and they were a huge part, as I mentioned earlier, of vaccination, testing, outreach, information, etc. And there are also some interesting stories of projects that are involved in the supply chain, like the one in the background video right here, which is Sterling Ultra Cold. They make freezers that keep things very cold, like vaccines. And the video that just finished up before this one was of President Joe Biden at the Houston Food Bank. And that food bank once again did some heroic work, as they did during Hurricane Harvey and many times before. The Houston Food Bank, of course, has been financed multiple times through new markets. And there are also examples of 2020 projects that were financed specifically to address problems related to COVID. For example, U.S. Bank provided working capital to the Martin Luther King Jr. Community Hospital. They were facing increased financial stress because, as was the case across the country, people were putting off elective procedures, and that really put a crunch on a lot of physicians and doctors, as well as providers like MLK Hospital. Another example is Loving Arms Home Care Agency, also working capital, and that's for a home health care business in Jackson and Memphis, Tennessee, that serves people with developmental and intellectual disabilities.